Okay, we'll go to item 5B, presentation discussion on the status of the City of Broken Arrow and Broken Arrow Municipal Authority's water and wastewater utility infrastructure. Kenny, you said all these presentations will take 8 minutes, right?
Yes, 8 minutes. Thank you, Chairman, trustees. What I'd like to do right now is give a presentation on the status of our utilities, kind of following up with what Tim just discussed and some of the things that we're addressing throughout our programs. Just start with, there we go. Last Tuesday, the mayor and I had an opportunity to sit in the Senate budget hearing on the EPA, which is EPW committee, and it was quite interesting. Some of the phrases that I heard routinely, multiple times, talking about the nation's infrastructure, not just Broken Arrows, but these are cities, local governments are having these type of issues. I kept hearing aging infrastructure, environmental impacts, deferred maintenance, escalating costs, not just on construction, but operations, increasing utility rates, more stringent regulations, emerging technologies, both in improvement in materials, like Tim just talked about. We used a 36-inch concrete pipe for a sanitary sewer. Back in the 80s, we only had 2 choices for that size. Steel, which is not going to be a good choice, or concrete. Those were basically the 2 choices we had. Emerging technologies, now our plants, our water and our wastewater treatment plants are improving on technology, can actually get down to lower level of detections. So that's where the stringent regulations are coming. So how do we, as an authority, address these items? And with aging infrastructure, where did this begin? How do we do this? How do we balance a lot of these? Well, Broken Arrow has a very rich history, and I'm showing it with population. But the population, as you see these numbers and think about the analysis that we're showing on population, I want you to think about what's underground, your water system, your sanitary sewer system. Population has a direct correlation with those collection systems and that distribution system. Broken Arrow started really in 1903. The first population that came out of record was in 1904. Basically from 1904 to 1940, pretty steady, standard population, straight across the board. We actually mirrored Coweta, our neighbor to the southeast. In 1940, we basically had about 600 more people than Coweta. Something happened between the 40s and the 50s. We had a big surge, a 7.3% population increase. What happened to our utilities? What happened to our water? What happened to our sanitary sewer? Then from 1950 to from 40 to 50, an 82% increase. 1960, 100% increase in our population. By 1970, 1980, look at the number in 1980, 204%. If I recall correctly, as a young boy reading the Tulsa World article, City of Broken Arrow was the 2nd fastest growing city in the United States, second to Jacksonville, Florida. 204% increase in our population. What happened to our utilities? What happened to our utilities at that point in time? Over the far right, actually the next to the far right, I want you to look at the decade difference, the population. All of a sudden there in 1980, 24,000 people. From 1970 to 1980, 24,000 people moved into Broken Arrow. They had to have utilities. We had to extend our water. We had to extend our sewer. We had to address it with our water treatment plants, our wastewater treatment plants. For 4 decades, 24,000, 23,000, 17,000, 24,000. This chart may show it a little better. From 1910 to 1940, pretty standard. This is just showing the decade increase. Then all of a sudden we start changing. What changed us? I figure in 1940, the coal mining, the strip mining, we saw some increase. 1950, something very significant happened in the history of Broken Arrow. Highway 51, bypassed downtown. 25 years of practice as a consultant, the thing I've noticed in roadways in different communities, not just in Oklahoma, but you hear it in other states, but my practice was in Oklahoma. When a highway bypasses a community, the downtown begins to die, the population levels off or begins to decrease. Not in Broken Arrow. We were different. We grew. We bypassed from basically Oneida to 71st Street. 1965, May of 1965, 51 years ago this month, Broken Arrow Expressway bypassed the Kenosha corridor, 71st Street. We pick up from 71st and we go into downtown. We grew again. We continue to grow. Our utilities grow as well. A little bit of history on the water side. I'm not going to read every one. A few of these are highlighted a little more in bold. 1963 was the ground storage tank on Tiger Hill, the first 1 million gallons. We now have 4 million gallons up there. What I wanted to point out is the second and the third item. 1967, that's when we built our Verdigris water treatment plant. 4 million gallons. 9 years later, we expanded to 10 million gallons. That's a big increase in 9 years. That's a huge increase in 9 years. What did we just do in 2014? One of the down at the bottom, we built a new Verdigris River microfiltration, 20 million gallons. 1979, we build more tanks. 76, another tank. 81, we leave our water treatment plant and we now start buying from UWA. But what you see up there from 63 to 83, a 20-year period, you see a lot of investment from the gentlemen and the women that went before you on the council. Of course, I think Mr. Parks was back there in the 70s and he voted on a few of these.
He did. But he's older than the rest of us.
He's older than the rest of us. Constantly, you had water and sewer issues in front of you back in the 70s. But now, those systems have aged. They're 40, they're 50, some of them are 60 years old. Trunk sewer that we just talked about was actually came online basically in the 80s. Let's talk about the wastewater a little bit. The original wastewater treatment plant was located over there at Detroit and Elm, just west of Elm, right there around United Rentals or the Met. That's where the original wastewater treatment plant for the city was. In the late 50s, we designed a new one and we built the west side plant, which would be out there at the end of Boston over by Vandiver, the elementary school. That plant served us from 1970 until the late, 1960 until 70. So about a 10-year period. And then we run our trunk sewer, the Lynn Lane trunk sewer from downtown and from the plant all the way down to a new plant. That plant became online in the early 70s. Notice in 1970, we built a 1 million gallon a day wastewater treatment plant that is still operational today with many upgrades that we've done to it. 1971, the regional metropolitan utilities authorities formed, and for what purpose? Wastewater treatment at Hakey Creek. By 1976, we have a pump station and another wastewater treatment facility. So in 6 years, we've built two, one by ourselves and one we partnered with Tulsa. Again, the big point here is from 1960, really 1970 to 76 and early 80s, we invested a lot into our wastewater infrastructure, just like we did our water. Just kind of a quick shot of your utilities. We have one water treatment facility, a 20 million gallon a day microfiltration plant. The finished water storage is 6 million. The high service pumps, they're at the plant. We have four, roughly 12 million gallons a day, 900 horse. Let's talk about the storage. We have 10 million gallons of storage in our low pressure plane. 4 on Tiger Hill, Battle Creek is 5, and then on New Orleans South is 1 elevated. We have 1 million gallons of storage on the First Baptist Church for the high pressure plane. We have 4 booster pumps. 3 of them are dedicated to residential areas. Kenwood Hills 1, Reflection Ridge, Greenbrier, and Battle Creek take up the other 3. And then we have 1 direct feed, which feeds the high service or the high pressure plane storage. Supplemental water connections. We have 2 in place right now. There's an item that we will address later on the agenda for a third. Collectively, 4 to 4.5 million gallons is what we can get through the 2 connections that we have with Tulsa right now. Wastewater, as I mentioned, we are part owners of one with our Hakey Creek RMUA, 12 million gallons. The other's 8 million. Lift stations, we have 30 in-system lift stations. 30 lift stations. We're trying to take some of them offline. Guess what's happening in the southwest part of Broken Arrow? We're growing. More subdivisions. A lot of those have to pump. So we actually have 2 or 3 pending lift stations. We have 2 that I call dedicated lift stations. They're direct feeds. Indian Springs go directly to the plant, and then Hakey Creek goes directly to RMUA. Quickly, there's just some of the pictures and some of the dates. That's the Tiger Hill storage. We got a new logo on a tank. That's New Orleans, 1983, and then Battle Creek, and then the one on our high pressure plant, 2005. We are maintaining and we are doing some improvements to the tanks. Now here's our plants, 1976, that was the original plant. And then the picture to your right is what we have today in 2014. Wastewater, 2008 is our Lynn Lane plant on the left, and then 1999 is the Hakey Creek on the right. Both of those are, we've got scheduled improvements. What are we doing? How are we meeting a challenge of the aging infrastructure? As I've told my staff, Broken Arrow has defied the history before, the trends, the trend of you bypass with a highway, you die. We've invested into our downtown. We continue to grow. We want to be a leader in how we meet our aging infrastructure. We want to be a leader, not just locally, but we want to be a leader across the United States. We have a program that we've been working on. It's right now meeting with the city manager staff, meeting with finance, a 5-year capital improvement plan that we've kind of worked out. What's our needs over the next 5 years? What does it cost on an annual basis? How are we going to address those finances? Like I said, we're at the point where we're ready to meet with that, try to fine tune that, polish that up. We'll be bringing that back to you for your, our recommendation back to you on that. But some of the items that I've got pointed out right now, this is just our water system improvements over really the next 2 years, 2017 and 2018. Big items, we have several at the plant. We've got to implement some sludge removal program. We've already done the expansion, the 4th one down. We've added the membranes. We've got to talk about UWA, the Grand River Line connection. What are we going to do with that? At the last council meeting, authority meeting, we approved a contract with HDR to study our different options. So that's already in place. Master connections, we'll talk about that here in a minute. We actually are trying to get a 3rd connection with TMUA. We are jumping through every hoop. TMUA has been very good to work with on this. They understand. We are trying to be proactive and ensure that our community has safeguards in place. Some of the other distribution, we've already got Kenwood Hill Booster Pump Station rehabilitation. That design is underway right now. We're trying to move that forward. Transmission line, what's the transmission line? Well, basically from 96th Street, halfway between 91st and halfway between 101st on Lynn Lane, we have a south loop plan that starts there, 24-inch, that will continue down to 111th or Florence, and then we'll head west to Elm, and then we'll tie into our system there. So we have a 24-inch water line. Kind of runs through the old Kirk Waterline District. Improve that, improve our flows to the south part of town. We've already put in a 16-inch water line, 2 miles of that from Elm to Olive, or yeah, I think Olive. And we have a couple more segments, 16-inch programmed. Some of that's ready to start design. Some of the 24 is actually being installed as we speak. So these are projects that we're trying to improve on the south side of town in our distribution. Some of the other things we're adding is a storage. We've got 2 million gallon water storage tower already under design. We've kind of located a couple of sites for it. We're ready to move forward and acquire that property and continue on with the design. So these projects are part of the next 2 years, not 5 years, just the first 2 years that we're looking at. That's water only. Wastewater's a little bigger because of our involvement with the RMUA. First one's up there on top in the kind of the orangish color, that's just the Hakey Creek RMUA. Then the other one we're doing is, we approved one tonight for Hakey Creek, some improvements to our collection system on the Hakey Creek side. That was approved tonight in the agenda. Some of the bigger items that we have on place with respect to Bama and Lynn Lane, we've got a county line truck sewer that was approved tonight, a design contract. That contract basically takes the improvements, the line that one of the part of the lines that we're struggling with and challenges on the county line, we're wanting to redesign with this Hobos pipe, basically from 131st Jasper up to Washington, 91st, several miles of that. In-house, to expedite the process, we're actually designing from the plant to Jasper in-house. We feel like that we can move that along a little quicker and potentially get some of those repairs in place starting this winter. As this trunk sewer line ages, and part of the problem, the deterioration in the line, is it's venting off the H2S gases. It's eating up the concrete. It's eating up the manholes. Just as Mr. Robbins talked about on the manhole collapsed and plugging up the line, we can begin to see that routinely. We don't want to sit back and wait for a critical mass on an aging infrastructure. We're moving forward with plans to improve it. Obviously, a big challenge is funding, and that will go back to the program that we're talking about. Lastly, like I said, the program includes all of these projects in the next 2 years. We're either in the state of design, we will be coming back in design, asking for contracts and moving into construction. One of the biggest ones that's on tap right now is the next presentation on what are we planning to do at the Lynn Lane plant to address some improvements, to address the odor, to address the, like I said, just the improvements. HDR, Joel Camp will make that presentation here in just a few minutes. So at this point, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have concerning the utility.
Any questions of Kenny?
Was that 8 minutes?
Yeah, a few times.
Give or take.
You used up your allocation for the rest of the year.
Fair enough.
We did have someone that wanted to speak, a citizen wanted to speak on this issue.
Okay.
We have Larry Wilkerson.